Hello everyone. What happens when literature falls in love with nature, freedom, and imagination? Welcome to the Romantic Period, a revolution of emotion, creativity, and individuality. In this lesson, I'll talk about the Romantic Period and its time frame. I'll mention some of the main events that happened during the Romantic period. We'll talk about the subperiods of Romanticism. We'll see the key characteristics of this period, the key authors and their literary works, the language and literary devices used in this period, and we'll have a quick view of art during the Romantic period. And I'll talk about its impact and importance as a literary period in English literature, and I'll talk about the Georgian period. Is it included within the Romantic period or before or after? We'll see that later in this lesson. And is Jane Austen considered an author from the Romantic period? We'll see that also together. And at the end of this lesson, we'll have a comparison between the neoclassical age and Romanticism. So let's get started. Let's start with the first question. Why is it called the Romantic period? Here, it doesn't have to be a love story or something related to romance. Here, what we mean by romantic is the style. We have in this period, the style is imaginative, emotional, and we have heroic storytelling. So the style is romantic, and that's why it is called the Romantic period. This period was inspired by medieval romance, folklore, and dreams. And as you remember in the previous video, I talked about the neoclassical age. We said it's the age of reason and the age of enlightenment. So it is considered as a reaction to the enlightenment and industrialism. So people wanted to go back to nature and to romance. Let's talk about the historical background of the Romantic period. This period, of course, witnessed a lot of historical incidents. In 1798, William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge published the Lyrical Ballads, and this literary work is considered the beginning of the age of Romanticism. We'll see later why it is that important and why does it mark the beginning of Romanticism. This period also witnessed the French Revolution, which called for liberty, equality, and rebellion. And it witnessed also the Industrial Revolution, and it called for a return to emotion and mystery. And it ends almost simultaneously with the beginning of the Victorian age that we'll see later. So, since we are talking about the historical background, why is the Lyrical Ballads considered the beginning or the start of Romanticism? As I mentioned before, it's a literary work. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge co-authored this literary work. It replaced classical poetic form with everyday language, and it focused on emotion, imagination, nature, and simplicity. So that's why it's like the first solid romantic literary work. And it marked a major break from the Enlightenment literature. So that's why it's considered the start of Romanticism. Some scholars divide the Romantic period into three subperiods: early Romanticism, high Romanticism, and late Romanticism. Early Romanticism goes back to what was before the official start of Romanticism. It's like the end of the Neoclassical age and the beginning of the Romanticism. It is marked by the emotional rebellion against Neoclassicism. We can consider William Blake one of the main authors during the early Romanticism period. In High Romanticism, of course, we have William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And as you know, High Romanticism is the core of Romanticism. It calls for going back to nature, ordinary life, and the spiritual vision. However, late Romanticism, it's marked by mortality, radical politics, and Gothic themes. We can here see Mary Shelley and Lord Byron and many other writers. The core characteristics of the Romantic period can be marked by these three important words: emotion, intuition, and imagination. So these are the core characteristics of this period, as it calls for the connection or reconnection to nature and the sublime. We see some focus on childhood and the inner self, and we are introduced to themes related to supernatural elements and some Gothic horror. And of course, it's the age of poetry. Poetry reached its peak in this period. We see lyrical and emotional poetry, and we are introduced to many genres and forms of literature, such as lyric poetry and Gothic novels. And we see also some personal essays and even some essays on criticism. The Romantic period had many key authors and literary works, especially in poetry. We can remember William Blake and William Wordsworth and the Lyrical Ballads, which he co-authored with Samuel Taylor Coleridge. We see also works of Lord Byron and his famous Byronic hero. This term we will talk about it later in other videos. And we see Shelley and Mary Shelley and John Keats and many other famous authors during that Romantic period. And of course, if we want to talk about language and the literary style of the Romantic period, it is rich in imagery, metaphor, and personification. We see nature as the spiritual guide, and we see blank verse and lyrical poetry, and we see also first person narration and deep emotion. If we talk about art and culture during the Romantic period, also it was a rich period as far as visual art and culture were concerned. We see emotional, stormy landscapes, and we see Gothic architecture, and we see Beethoven's expressive music, for example. It was composed during this Romantic period. The Romantic period is considered as one of the most important literary periods in English literature. It had its lasting impact and importance. We see in this period like articles on criticism and essays that consider poets as the prophets or the visionaries of the future. This literary period gave big importance to poets, and it influenced transcendentalism and modernism, and it helped shaping some environmental awareness. And also, let's not forget Mary Shelley's work Frankenstein, which is considered the beginning of science fiction. And this period is said to be the inspiration for Gothic horror and psychological literature. Let's now talk about one of the most famous authors in English literature, and maybe one of the most beloved ones, Jane Austen, a transitional figure. She lived between 1775 and 1817 during the Romantic period. However, her style in writing is more similar to the one in the Neoclassical period. So that's why she is considered as a transitional figure. She combines between the style of the Neoclassical and the theme of the Romantic period. She focuses on order and social manners and moral clarity, and she is often seen as part of the Regency era. We'll talk about it later in this video. So she is considered as a bridge between Neoclassicism and Romanticism with her irony and realism. So a minute ago I mentioned the Regency era in the Georgian period while talking about Jane Austen. So what is the Georgian period? First, let's talk about its date. Circa 1714 till 1830, and according to some scholars till 1837. Why do we call this period the Georgian period? Simply because of the four kings that this era witnessed: George the First, the Second, the Third, and the Fourth. Some scholars include William the Fourth also in the Georgian period. So it's named after the four kings George, from George the First till George the Fourth. And its historical frame is between the neoclassical age and the romantic age. So it's considered as the bridge, exactly like Jane Austen. It was the transition or the transitional phase between the neoclassical age and the romantic period. So we see romantic literature thriving during the end of the Georgian period and the beginning of Romanticism. So, in short, the Georgian period is a historical frame, not a literary movement. It includes both the end of the neoclassical age and the beginning of the Romantic period. And it includes this term, the Regency era, 1811 till 1820. And it is normally associated with the Georgian Romanticism, like the end of the Georgian period. Now, just to recap, you remember in the previous video I talked about the Neoclassicism, and today we are talking about Romanticism. So let's compare between them just to get a recap or a summary for what we have studied so far. So the focus of each one is different. Neoclassical period focuses on order, reason, the age of reason it's called. Meanwhile, Romanticism is focusing on emotion, imagination, intuition, and nature is viewed as controlled and rational in the neoclassical age. Meanwhile, in the Romantic period, it's sublime, spiritual, and wild. We have different characters introduced, or types of characters or heroes in both periods. We see the morally upright, rational character in the neoclassical age. We see the Byronic hero, which we will talk about later in other videos, and we see rebellious characters in the Romantic period. And the form, of course, the neoclassical had classical fixed form. Meanwhile, the Romantic one, poetry was at its peak and it had organic expressive structure. And for the subject matter, in the neoclassical, we see topics related to society, rules, civilization. Meanwhile, we see more personal topics in Romanticism, things related to the soul, to the feelings. And of course, the inspiration, the neoclassical was inspired by the ancient Greek and Roman cultures. Meanwhile, the Romantic one was, we can say, somehow inspired by the medieval folklore and nature. So here we reach the last slide in my presentation about the Romantic literature, which gave voice to the soul's deepest cries. I hope that this video was useful. In the next video, I'll talk about the Victorian period. Hope to see you later.